Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our Allison Auditorium. Mr. Secretary, welcome back to the Heritage Foundation. We're always delighted to have you, and we're honored that you've decided to give your first major policy address here at Heritage, and we look forward to hearing from you. Secretary Ryan Zinke was sworn in as the 52nd Secretary of the Interior on March 1st of this year. Fifth-generation Montanan, former U.S. Navy SEAL commander, became one of the strongest track records in the 114th Congress on champion sportsman's access, conservation, regulatory relief, forest management, responsible energy development, and smart management of federal lands. Prior to assuming his current job, he served in the U.S. House of Representatives, before that in the Montana State Senate, and 23 years as a U.S. Navy SEAL officer. He grew up in Montana near Glacier National Park, where he developed a lifelong appreciation for conserving America's natural beauty while honoring Teddy Roosevelt's vision of multiple use of our public lands. He's consistently in the Congress, and now as Secretary, led efforts to renew the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Also has been a firm advocate for our nation's sportsmen to gain access to public lands through the SCORE Act and the SHARE Act. He's been involved in a host of other activities, which I'm sure he will share with us. But going back a little further, 1985, he was commissioned as an officer in the United States Navy, earned his trident as a Navy SEAL, where he served with distinction until he retired in 2008. Several tours, including acting as Deputy and Acting Commander of Joint Special Forces in Iraq, 2 tours as on SEAL Team 6, the first Navy SEAL elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. He has an agency with more than 70,000 employees who are stewards for 20% of our nation's lands, including national parks, monuments, wildlife refuges, and other public lands. The department oversees and is the responsible development of conventional and renewable energy supplies on public lands and public waters. He's the largest supplier and manager of water in the 17 western states. He upholds trust responsibilities to the 567 federally recognized American Indian tribes and Alaskan natives. He holds a degree in geology from the University of Oregon, master's degree in business and finance. It's my very great pleasure to ask Secretary Zinke to come up and share his views, his policy views with us. Mr. Secretary. Welcome back.
Well, and thank you, Doctor, for being a champion of conservative values, and also for hiring my good friend Kelly Stimson. Before we get started, I'd just like to address, in the words of General Schwarzkopf, a little BS on travel. And I just want to read a little statement for you so you have it. Is that I believe taxpayers absolutely have the right to know official travel costs. It's common sense. And at the department, we make those documents and my travel schedule available to everyone. Using tax dollars wisely and ethically is a greatest responsibility, and it is at the good heart of good government. And there are times, however, we have to utilize charter services because we often travel in areas and under circumstances that we don't have other flight options. I fly coach. Since being sworn in, I've used a charter on 3 occasions. The first occasion was being invited on a bipartisan congressional delegation by the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee and the Arctic Circle. As you know, the Alaskan Senator Lisa Murkowski is the chair, and I find her company and her invitation to be consistent with the Department of Energy's or Department of Interior's policies. Number two, flying late at night to the great state of Montana on invitation. I make our invitation to meet the great governor of the great state of Montana and to speak at the Western Governors Association the next morning. Number three, and traveling to and between the islands of the United States Virgin Islands. As you are aware, Interior has the federal oversight of the territories from the Virgin Islands to Palau, and the Virgin Islands are part of that. And I was invited and accepted the invitation to be part of their 100th anniversary of the transition of power between the Danes and America. And I was privileged to attend those ceremonies with Governor Mapp and the Prime Minister of Denmark. I also took military air with Secretary Perdue. So he and I could go out and meet with the wildfireland crews in Montana as the fires happen year after year. I might remind you, we also lost a firefighter fighting those fires. I also fly military air with the President and the Vice President when asked by invitation. I intend to continue flying in the benefit and on official duties. And all this travel was done only after it was determined by multiple career professionals at the department that no commercial options existed to meet the promulgated schedule. And as importantly, the flights were only booked after extensive due diligence by the career professionals in the department's General Law and Ethics Division. Every time I travel, I submit the travel plan to the Ethics Department that evaluates it line by line to make sure that I am above the law and I follow the law. Of course, we are always continuing to look at ways to lower costs in the department and also, as you'll find out, to increase revenues. And I'll always be honest and upfront about my travel. In fact, you can follow me on Twitter. So if you followed me on Twitter, you knew that I traveled by Suburban from Valley Forge this morning. So, and now with that, besides, let's go to why we're here. Energy. So, as our nation stands today, we're at an energy crossroads. And there are two visions for our future in energy. One side believes we should retreat into a fortress of regulation and red tape where foreign nations take the lead as America drowns itself in process and procedure. This is not the vision of President Trump. Going forward, our participation in the global energy market will protect and defend American sovereignty and not surrender it.
Secretary Zinke, how many calls have you taken with
Our decisions will be guided by our flag and not kneel to anyone. America is exceptional. This administration, the president, believe in American energy dominance. And energy dominance is different than energy independence. Our goal is an America that is the strongest energy superpower this world has ever known. Our country is inherited an energy-dependent country from previous generations. And in recent years, we've struggled to be self-sufficient in producing low-cost, abundant, and reliable energy. But a new era is dawning. With American leadership, innovation, and good ideas, our challenge will be to pass energy dominance onto our children and grandchildren. Under President Trump, we'll put America first, and we'll put America's energy first. As the chief steward of our public lands, my job is to make sure that all Americans have a voice. That all Americans have a voice. And I hear that voice loud and clear. Our government must restore the promise of our energy economy for a stronger, more secure America. And I can assure you today that the war on American energy is over. To end this war and bring back the American dream to every American family, we have to restore trust in our federal government. And you may be wondering why the Secretary of Interior is here speaking today about energy. Interior's portfolio is vast. It stretches 12 or 10 time zones from the Virgin Islands to Palau, and it includes 1/5 of our nation's territories. 9 of the department's 10 bureaus have significant energy programs and responsibilities. And these programs include oil, gas, coal, hydroelectric, wind, solar, geothermal, and biomass. With this extensive portfolio, we have a responsibility to be fair and transparent with our job-creating energy sector, but that's not how our government has operated in the last 8 years. Permitting applications often sat on the desk of regulators in Washington for months and months, in some cases years. Meanwhile, local economies suffered as a focus on bureaucracy over prosperity delayed jobs and prevented wealth that American energy promised to bring. With President Trump in office, we're looking at how we can be a better business partner with industry, and we're finding ways to get to yes without sacrificing our stewardship responsibilities. One of our biggest problems with permitting process has been how many bureaus and agencies had to independently evaluate and sign off before a project was approved. The system was broke. And let me give you an example. If you have a trout and a salmon in the same stream, and upstream you have a dam or a lock, and downstream the waters are used for irrigation. Well, the salmon are managed by NIMS through the Department of Commerce. The trout is managed by Fish and Wildlife through Interior. Upstream, the dam water flows and temperature is managed by our friends of the Army Corps of Engineers. And downstream, the irrigation is managed and controlled by Bureau of Reclamation. Each of these government entities have great people, but each of them oftentimes do their own biological opinion. You'll have 4 biological opinions, and 2 of them will not be reconcilable. We're going to fix this problem at Interior by changing the structure and learning how to be joint. Our government needs to learn to work together. The bureaus within Interior and our brothers and sisters in the other agencies need to learn to work together, to be responsive to the people who we serve, and that's America. And this is how we fight fires out in the West, and this is how the military operates, so it's nothing new. It's a straightforward, and this is how we're going to get to yes. With our joint model, we can actually show that the government can work together, and we can also incorporate state and tribal interests at the beginning of the process to improve collaboration, consultation, and coordination. I've long believed that our government makes too many top-down decisions without giving the people on the ground in local communities a greater voice. That stops with this administration. We're streamlining the process to make sure it's fair and consistent and not arbitrary, while protecting the safety of our American workers, protecting our public lands, and making sure we protect the values that have made America great. The Trump administration will not streamline at the expense of security. We will not streamline at the expense of the environment. We will not streamline at the expense of safety. We will streamline at the expense of getting the job done as America expects us to do. We're committed to better cooperation and partnership with industry to expand responsible development while holding our industry partners absolutely accountable to strict safety and environmental standards. We'll welcome innovation rather than creating regulation that prevents it. Regulation should be grounded on science and careful analysis and not agenda and ideology. And that's why this administration is reducing punitive regulations that have stagnated our economy, and we are cutting the annual regulatory agenda by over 50%. This is a national imperative. So why is energy important in the first place? Really, with me, it's three reasons. First is the environment. As many of you know, I'm a great admirer of Teddy Roosevelt. I think he had it right. I don't believe our public lands should be sold or transferred. I do believe our public lands are for the benefit and enjoyment of the people. And it's better to produce energy here under reasonable regulations than watch it gets produced overseas with none. As a Navy SEAL, I've been to a lot of countries in my life. And if you want to watch how energy is produced without regulation and the consequences that have, I invite you to take a tour with me to the Middle East and Africa. I can assure you, America leads the world in innovation, the regulation to make sure our energy is done right, period. And we're the model for the world. The second is national security. America's strength relies on American energy. And I don't want to see us ever be held hostage to a foreign country to heat our homes and to power this nation. On a personal note, I don't want to ever see your children have to fight overseas for a commodity we have here. I've been to battle. And I never want your children to see what I've seen. And if we can produce energy here, with responsibility, that is a better course. And frankly, as a former military officer, I'm concerned. I'm concerned about Iran. I'm concerned about their development of ballistic missiles and nuclear capability. And Iran is a grave threat. And it is better to have options to address Iran economically and not just militarily. And that economic leverage of being able to supplant every drop of crude that Iran produces is a leverage. And energy dominance is part of that. And finally, American prosperity. Jobs matter. And there's a social cost of not having a job. Hardworking Americans deserve to have a future, and they deserve to have an opportunity to obtain the American dream. And when America removes our resources through moratoriums and bans, it's not the political class of Washington that suffers. It's the hardworking men and women who get laid off from their jobs. It's communities across the country that fall in despair, and local businesses and opportunities diminish for all Americans. Trillions of dollars in American wealth and millions of jobs have been moved overseas as our politicians here at home have turned their back on America's potential for energy dominance. And it's time to stop the bleeding. It's time to put America first. And under President Trump, American energy, mined and produced by American hands, will make America great again. American energy dominance will require an all-the-above energy strategy. All the above. It's not just oil and gas and coal, but through innovation, advances in technology, energy can be the benefit of all of us. And one of the hardest places hit in the last administration was in West Virginia. And 8 months ago, West Virginians had lost hope. Mines were closing, jobs were being ripped away. But under this administration, West Virginia is roaring back. We recently celebrated the opening of the Berwind mine, which brought back economic security and hope. In fact, in the first quarter of 2017, West Virginia was second in the nation in GDP. Out west, local communities like in my home state of Montana, sincere hurt. And I come from a railroad and timber town. And if you want to see small towns get stripped, no jobs, the elderly, kids can't come home, it affects a lot of small communities. But I can tell you the administration's war on coal and mining and timber and the ability for a local community to have opportunity and to use our public lands for wealth, but responsibly, that's over. One of my first actions as Secretary of Interior to reverse the ban on coal leasing on our public lands. And it's no surprise that mining was up 20% nationally in the first quarter. And GDP now stands at 3.1% this quarter. 3.1% this quarter. And we're also making progress in oil and gas. The Trump administration has offered more onshore oil and gas leases in the first 6 months of 2017 than the previous administration did in all of 2016. We've held the first successful sale in the Cook Inlet. And I'm pleased to say in the Gulf of Mexico, we're going to announce our oil and gas leases will be greatly expanded. Under previous administrations, 94% of our offshore was made off limits. And this includes our resources in the great state of Alaska. Under President Trump's leadership, we've initiated a 5-year plan to open up more areas for oil and gas exploration and development. And the road to energy dominance goes through the great state of Alaska. Early this year, we had our first successful bid in the Cook Inlet in over 20 years. I can tell you, with 1/3 of Alaskan workforce employed by the oil and gas industry, shutting off resource development has been devastating. I've signed a secretarial order to review our policies on development in the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska, as well as in the 1002 section of the North Slope that was specifically set aside Congress to evaluate. Specifically set aside by Congress to evaluate. And doing seismic operations and looking at doing the inventory of what this nation has is a responsibility of the Department of Interior, and I take it seriously. I also take it seriously to make sure that we have a proper balance between conservation and using our public lands wisely. Just before I went to Alaska and signed my secretarial order, I met with the mayor of the Alaska North Slope Bureau, and he expressed to me in no certain terms how positive this administration has been on the Native Alaskans and the state's rural population. The last administration turned their back on these patriotic and enormously proud people. And I can tell you, as the Department of Interior Secretary, they have the right to make their own decisions. And nobody loves our public lands more than I. I grew up in Montana, the foothills of Glacier National Park. And that's why I'm glad to see advances in the technology, and they're opening up new possibilities that didn't exist before. The pads are smaller in footprint. Directional drilling and GPS technology are allowing us to do things that we never thought was possible. I'm a former geologist. I say former because when I went to school, I was taught that we were going to be out of oil in 2003, that there was peak oil. That's not possible with fracking. But we have better computing. We have better precision. And we can do it right. I've seen fracking improve, where higher pressures and temperatures are producing greater energy yields, and the process is safer. And in many cases, within 2 or 3 inches, at 10,000 feet, with a horizontal of miles. And I've said time and time again, this administration does not pick winners and losers. We don't. I've also looked at exciting technologies and see progress being made in renewables and cleaner energy like wind, solar, and hydropower. And those are equally important. But they also have to be market-driven and at a cost point where they're competitive. Some of that is investing in more research and development. We're close on some breakthrough technologies in battery storage. But until we are, we have to use the resources we have. Tell you, we're going to probably be this year #1 in oil and gas. And next year, we will likely be a next exporter in liquid natural gas. And that's the first time in 60 years. And our nation will continue, I am convinced, to increase market share, and we have a great opportunity to fuel the world. And stewardship of our public lands, I take seriously. And I understand that our public lands are our greatest treasures. I think we should manage our public lands for the benefit and enjoyment of the people. And if you've ever been to Yellowstone National Park, that's what it says in the arch, for the benefit and enjoyment of the people. And this means that energy development and hunting and fishing and camping and habitat and protection and other forms of outdoor recreation are all part of conservation. And the American conservation ethic is using best science and best practices and using the land for the greatest good, for the greatest number in the long run. That's the American conservation ethic. And energy development on our public lands and the revenue that energy generates from lease sales, one should remember it funds things like the Land Water Conservation Fund, hunting and fishing licenses, and the purchase of ammunition. Funds about $2.2 billion just last year in conservation. But if you go back to 2008, Interior was the #2 revenue generator in the government, right behind her friends at the IRS. In revenue, we produced about $18 billion a year just in offshore oil and gas. And it was a banner year. Last year, we produced $2.6 billion a year. That's a drop of $15 billion a year of revenue. So when I look at our national parks being $11.5 billion behind in maintenance and repair, our wildlife system about $3 billion behind in needed maintenance and repair. On scale, a loss of $15 billion in revenue would have made up the entire backlog of maintenance and given us a significant opportunity to reinvest and recapitalize in a lot of areas we need in 1 year. That's the scale of what occurred. And that's the consequence of putting 94% of our offshore holdings off limits and even making the National Petroleum Reserve unavailable for exploration and development. And I think a renewed focus on working together with industry can and should benefit our parks and our public lands as we address how, as a nation, to fund our parks. And as a military officer, I always thought our government has two principal responsibilities. One is to fund the military, and the other to fund our national parks. Our national parks are not a Republican or Democrat or independent issue. They're a national and American issue, and they're worthy of our support as Americans. So our solemn obligation, my solemn obligation as Secretary of Interior, is to take better care of those treasures and to maintain them as a great nation should. So the American comeback story, I think, has waited too long to be written. And with President Trump in office, our country is winning again. And energy, quite frankly, is driving the bus. I think we'll stand shoulder to shoulder as a united American people, and we should be proud that our country was given the resources and energy we have, and we should be proud that our energy industry is innovative as they are. And with stronger infrastructure and a new approach to energy development, I think jobs will return to this country, and America truly will be great again. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We will, of course, post today's program on the Heritage webpage for everyone's future reference. We are adjourned.